The article takes into consideration the basic principles of the functionalist theory proposed by Bernard. For the case study, they applied concepts like scopus, target culture, into a technical conference of 3 days with professional interpreters in English and German. The application of the theoretical concepts of scopus to this case study reveals some limitations of the functional theory in simultaneous interpreting conference. Now I'm going to talk about the outline. The author starts with an introduction divided in 3 parts. The first one is translation and or interpreting. The author says that in many cases, translation and interpreting could be considered as the face of the same coin, 2 sides of the same coin. Different studies try to understand the concept of translation as a written, oral activity. In that period, the linguistics was a ground to the translation studies related to interpreting studies. The focus was on words, whether the oral rendition. So there was an imbalance of quantity of studies. Next slide, please. Sense theory proposed by Danica Seleskovich was applied successfully to interpreting training. And it was very important for the conference interpreting theory. This was the beginning for interpreting research. However, since it lacked of systematic analysis, generated the appearance of cognitive psychology guiding discipline for empirical research. As a consequence, a series of researchers qualified the field of interpreting research very low. Therefore, they agree that we need more research in this field. Matthew states that if interpreting studies is considered as a separate discipline from translation studies, then it is lagging behind. Then the authors talk about process versus product. He says that this field is focused on words rather than sense and the commission of translation. So he says that the main question is, how does interpreting work? The focus of conference interpreting research is on elucidating the micro-level process involved in this complex cognitive task. Lastly, he presents the translation and interpreting theory for product-oriented interpreting research, and it has 4 objectives. First is to demonstrate that this argument is useful for broadening the theoretical base of interpreting studies. The second objective is to create a theoretical relationship between research on translation and interpreting. They also aim to discuss the potential and limitations of the functional theory in simultaneous interpreting. And lastly, they want to show that the interpreting researchers can find new challenges in this field. Now we're going to talk about the purpose that justifies translation. In the 60s and 70s, the theories were based on linguistic studies. During the 70s, they saw a reorientation in the study of language, away from abstract rules and systems towards concrete use of language. Then, the scopus theory was developed by Rice and Vermeer. This theory is a process of culture transfer. The scopus, or purpose, is something that translation and interpreting must achieve and is conditioned by the target culture, meaning that the text must make sense in the target culture. Otherwise, it would be misunderstood. They also mentioned that it must exist an intertextual coherence related to fidelity or loyalty of the source text. However, they say that scopus is the most important variable in this field. Scopus arises from the client, and interpreters must consider the time, place, and circumstances. These elements are very important for the interpreter and the client. Now we're going to talk about simultaneous interpreting in a functionalist framework, which is a scopus in simultaneous interpretation. In conference interpreting, the relationship between the client and the interpreter, it's not as easy as it seems. In comparison with translated texts, the client doesn't want a translated text, but a much more complex communicative event. The conference can be considered as a type of global text composed by individual texts or hypertexts. Guild identified 7 prototypes regarding degree of structural complexity, cultural homogeneity of group, informational intensity, visual support material, and information flow. The function of an original speech or its interpretation is therefore not limited to the analysis of the text, but to a socio-psychological data and dynamics of the situation of the interaction. The text must not be read as a translation, but as an original text of the target culture. The main aim is that the text is comprehensible and understandable in the target culture. For the Scopus theory, the intertextual coherence refers to the propositional elements within the text. A translated text should be analyzed to determine to which level is the most understandable in the target culture.